everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jessi. I'm the Director of Candidate Engagement at LaunchCode, and I'm so happy to be here with Prepare.ai today. I'm happy you could join me. As the Director of Candidate Engagement at LaunchCode, all that means is I get the chance to work with a dope team of people who guide members of our community on their journeys to careers in tech. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about the gender gap in AI. We're going to dig into the implications of the existing gender gap in tech and the AI workforce, how it's evident in the technology shaping the world around us. And we're going to talk about how LaunchCode and others are taking action to counter the biases we see being reproduced through tech to hopefully lead to a more inclusive tech ecosystem and more inclusive tools. To move through our conversation today, we're going to start with grounding ourselves in community with one another. We're going to highlight some of the realities of today's gender gap in AI, why it matters to today's workforce, the outcomes and the implications that gender gap has on our lives and on businesses. And because it has implications for businesses, we're going to quickly hit on why businesses and employers should not only care about that gender gap in AI, but why they should also worry about it. Um, but we're not going to sit in that worry. We can't sit in that worry, right? We're also going to talk about how to move our worry and concern into action. And we're going to pause at the end and imagine what could exist and what it could mean when we all take and participate in that action. So let's get into it. Again, like I said at the beginning, I'm so happy you're here to join me. I love this work. I love what I get to do. I love being in community with others. And while the opportunity to share virtual space with you all today means that my introverted heart is so happy that I am not stepping on the stage, because that will only increase the ball of nerves in my stomach right now. It also means that what usually is a moment for setting attention around shared community agreements and understanding is now me making a little bit of assumption about our community and assumptions on how we're going to share our space and time together today. So my community assumptions, not agreements, but assumptions, drive the framing of my presentation to you today. And so, of course, just to recap those assumptions, they're on the screen, but I like to speak it into existence. We acknowledge the identities that we hold and the realities that our identities ground us in. We imagine a future where everyone can thrive in an inclusive tech ecosystem. And we want to do the work within our sphere of influence to ensure that future can happen, right? So those are the assumptions that we're working with through this presentation today. And I really hope that you can agree to them. So let's get into it, right? Let's face the reality of it. So presenting to you like women by the numbers. Women make up 57% of today's workforce. Um, Women represent the majority of the workforce in industries like financial services, wholesale and retail trade. Um, But we're here to talk about tech, right? This is a Prepare.ai conference. I'm here to talk to you about the gender gap in tech. And so let's look at computing. Women make up only 26% of the computing industry. And that number is worse when you consider underrepresented women in tech, right? Let's hold that and sit with it. Black and Hispanic women in tech make up an estimated 5% of that 26% of women. And if we focus specifically on the AI sector, women make up 22% of the workforce, which sure is not far off from the computing industry as a whole, but it's still not great. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about women in the AI workforce and what that means for us. So as we turn our attention to AI, we can't help but to acknowledge the immediate wave of fear that sets over the general public. And I hope you know what I'm talking about. You know that like robots are stealing our jobs. They're taking over. What are we gonna do? Let's recognize that like that's fear. So let's break down the reality of that fear and what it can mean for everyday people. So first, it's very misleading to think of robots, automation, AI as taking over jobs, right? It's more reflective of reality, of our reality, to think of the industrialization of AI as using automation to take over tasks. So not jobs, but tasks. PwC breaks down this industrialization over 3 waves. And currently, we sit in the second wave of that industrialization. And it's estimated to continue through the next decade. The type of tasks to think of as being most affected by this wave are routine tasks. Think of tasks like filling out forms, think exchanging information. You can even think of like repeatable programming tasks are likely to be automated, right? And so this most immediately affects women as we consider the industries most impacted by this work, the industries that make the most frequent use of these tasks, right? And so these industries are very likely to be the financial sector, the insurance sector, and other sectors that involve high clerical work or a high level of clerical support, right? And so, like I said previously, it's no surprise. Women make up a large part of the workforce in those industries. And I have to be honest for a moment and like bring like all of the human of me into this is that like that part truly hit home for me. Especially as I think about my mother who works as an insurance claim specialist, literally all the intersecting parts of these industries that are likely to be automated. Um, and the reason why only 22 of the AI workforce being made up of women is scary is because when AI grows to automate these tasks that I just described, the tools being used to create the tools being created um, are also likely automating women out of the workforce. It's automating women out of the industries. That is because it's no secret. I hope we all know it if we're grounding ourselves in the reality here, right? Is that people are filled with bias. All of us, all people are filled with bias and have biases that we bring to everything that we do, everything that we see, and the way that we move in and interact with the world. In tech, that bias is carried into the things that we build, right? So Amazon had to kill, for example, Amazon had to kill a hiring tool being used in its recruiting because the machine learning model was penalizing and sifting women out of the candidate pool. Based on the training data, the machine taught itself that male candidates were preferable by penalizing words like women's or penalizing things like women's colleges that would show up in resumes. What happens when biases are baked into AI tools? This happens, right? This was the most hilarious thing to me, right? You know, we're all sitting in this virtual world and in this virtual space. Um, in the work that I do, I have to use Zoom very often, but I was like, ooh, I want to play around with the Zoom backgrounds too. This is what happened, right? I tried to have a little jokey joke, go with that. Everything is fine. Everything's gonna be fine, meme. And as you can see, that didn't turn out so well. Um, but this is what happens when biases are worked into the tools that we use and the technologies that we use. And while like this was hilarious, this is not like new, right? Um, as you can see, I am like a Black woman. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman, and this is something that happens frequently to women like me. Um, and so it's funny here, right? Like we can laugh at this, but it's not always funny. Um, Algorithms, tools, like they don't happen out of nowhere, and algorithmic bias matters. It particularly matters as AI extends beyond computer vision. Um, and there's the founder of what's called the Algorithmic Justice League. Her name is Joy. She goes by the Code of Code online. She points this out frequently in her talks. Please look into it if you have time. But what you'll hear from her time and time again is that who code matters, how we code it matters, and why we code it matters. And so, as we think about how AI is extending beyond computer vision into real effects in people's lives, it no longer becomes funny. It no longer becomes a joke. We think about AI in talent management. We think about AI in facial recognition. We think about AI being used to make decisions within healthcare, within banking, within admissions. And we think about AI being used in predictive policing, being used in the courtroom. These are people's lives. Like it's not funny anymore. It's not relegated to a joke. Um, but like I said before, these tools don't happen out of nowhere. So the good thing about this is we can create and implement practices that we need to become more inclusive, so that tools are more inclusive, so that the companies we work in, the code we write, the tools that are produced, the technologies that are produced, we can leverage the advantage of inclusion. And so what is that, right? When we talk about this advantage of inclusion, what are we talking about? Um, Basically, like research shows time and time again that there's an inclusion, there's an advantage to inclusion through diverse teams, right? When you talk about who is writing the code, and why they write the code and how they write the code, diverse teams have a real effect on that. And it matters to businesses. Like I said before, we're going to talk about why this matters to businesses. And this is why businesses should care. Time and time again, diverse teams perform better financially. They produce work teams that stay on schedule and under budget. And they also demonstrate improved employee performance. And like that's not all. There are a lot more advantages to having diverse teams and inclusive practices. We see increased revenue, particularly when women occupy a significant portion of top management positions within the tech ecosystem. Um, and while it may sound like silly, these inclusive environments also attract more talent. They attract better talent. You can only do better and better things, more inclusive things when we have diverse teams. And so, like, basically, to sum that up, like in one sentence, if I could, to put it simply, inequity is literally causing companies to fumble a bigger bag. That's what it is. But we're in luck, right? Being able to take advantage of inclusive practices to build inclusive tools is not a secret of how to approach that work. Strategies exist, right? The National Center for Women in Information Technology cite that a multifaceted approach to addressing the workforce can be one of the best ways to reach equity and inclusivity in the tech industry. And that's like the work we're going to talk about today. That's like how we'll move into taking this into action. We're going to focus on the who: recruiting, retaining, and advancing an innovative workforce. And so let's dig into the who, right? The who of like who is making up the tech ecosystem. And we're going to do this by looking specifically at training and recruitment. In 2018, US women represented 18% of computer science graduates. And that's like traditionally educated, right? So when we talk about 4-year CS degrees, women represented only 18% of that population, of that candidate pool. When we look at non-traditional education pathways as well, right, we see it go up quite a bit. Like that's not an insignificant amount through boot camps. What's known as like tech boot camps, where people learn to go to code for faster, for cheaper. We consider, the non-traditional pathway into tech. We see that pool of graduates be comprised of 37% of women. But if you pay attention to the statement at the bottom, is that like the computing related job openings are expected to hit 3.5 million by 2026. And that's not far from now, right? Like that's literally, it's like 6 years, 3.5 million computing related job openings. It's also estimated that 17% of these jobs could be filled by these US computing bachelor degree recipients. 2026. That's not only just talking about women, that's talking about all computer science. Like if we travel down the same path that we're currently on, all CS degrees could fill only 17% of the roles needed. What does that mean? That means like we got to do something differently. That means we need to do something innovative within the workforce if we expect to be able to fill the roles needed to continue having an innovative ecosystem, building innovative products, and moving the tech workforce forward and the tech ecosystem forward. And so let's kind of narrow that scope down a bit. I just talked about national rates, but let's put our eyes on the St. Louis region. I work for LaunchCode in our St. Louis hub. And so that's, what I chose to narrow it down to. That's what we're going to look at. In 2018, if we just talk about the St. Louis region, we saw just over 10,400 development jobs be posted, right? Let's talk about the number of CS degrees produced within the region, right? In 2018, there was an estimated 788 graduates from some of the region's top institutions for CS degrees. Again, just like we just saw on the past slide, the numbers don't add up, right? Like there's literally just not enough people taking that pathway into tech. That pathway into tech is not inclusive enough. It's not accessible enough to fill the amount of need that we see within the tech workforce. But still, we're going to keep the eye on women in this, right? Of those 788 CS degrees, only 129 represented women. And those are 4-year degrees in CS. One thing that I want to come back to this and think about as we look at that is, and we bring it back to AI, right? Because that's general, like we're talking about the general tech ecosystem, but think about what that means for data science and AI roles. If you go look at a data science job posting, the requirements, like, you bougie. The field is bougie, okay? Like, and it's ridiculous. PhD is the normal standard that you see set as a requirement for a data science role. These are roles that are really going to be like type of roles that are going to be making up the AI field, right? So if this is the numbers that we're sitting at for 4-year degrees, right? Think about what these numbers look like and the access of talent that becomes available when you add on 3, 4, 5 more years of school to this 4-year undergraduate degree. But again, like I said before, solutions are there, strategies exist, and that's where LaunchCode comes in. And that's where I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that we do at LaunchCode. And so our mission at LaunchCode is to provide pathways to economic opportunity through filling the tech talent gap. That includes the talent gap that exists within AI, right? We recognize that you have to educate people differently if you want to produce enough of the talent needed to fill this gap that we see in tech. And so since we've been talking about the St. Louis area and the St. Louis region, let's bring the focus back down to even LaunchCode's St. Louis hub, right? So of 684 graduates in 2018, that's LaunchCode program graduates. These are people who graduated our programs ready to hit the ground running within the tech ecosystem. They are looking for work. 44% of those self-identified as women, 44% self-identified as women. If you think back to those statistics I presented earlier, that is kind of blowing out of the water what we see through traditional pathways, right? And we can only connect that to the accessibility of our programs, right? We do what we do for free. We give people access to the chance to learn these skills for free. 32.9% are people of color, with 17% of that making up underrepresented minorities, right? So when we talk about Black and Latinx people within our classes, and I want to put a pause here because while I'm proud of the work that we do and while I love the work that we do, we also want to keep in mind that we can always do better. And that's what I love about working at LaunchCode. We know that we can do better. So while we look at these numbers, let's also think about what these numbers mean when we talk about Black and Hispanic women within our classes. Um, and then the last percentage of kind of the 684 graduates, we see just under 55% of these graduates coming from low income households. And so, how can we, like I said, strategies exist, right? LaunchCode is one of those strategies at attacking the workforce and recruitment within the tech workforce, within the AI workforce. Um, and it's about using a model that centers opportunity, right? Time and time again, you hear it. Talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. LaunchCode's model tries to center opportunity, and it's an ecosystem. It takes more than just us doing it, and that's where companies come in, right? Because this is a problem that you should also care about. There are ways and strategies that LaunchCode has thought through about how to make this work for companies. And so on our end of it, on the education side of it, we train people to code for free. We make it accessible so that people can keep their day jobs, right? Most of our programs happen in the evening and part-time so that people can continue earning wages during the day. But that all filters into the company side of this ecosystem, right? And so companies that we work with through our apprenticeship program, they consider on-the-job training an investment with a return. It's a good thing to be able to pull people in and to train them to do the work and to see them grow doing the work that you need to do when you can trust that they're coming in with the entry-level skills to be ready. And something our executive director, Jeff Mazur, talks about time and time again is that skills that hire are important, yes, but skills that hire plus a year later are more important. And if you missed his talk earlier this week, I really encourage you to go and look at it within uh, the video library available through the Prepare.ai conference, because he really makes a strong case and presents how our model has worked for businesses in the past. And LaunchCode's not the only one doing this work, right? There are also local organizations like Empower and CyberUp who kind of work on the same model, that are doing the work of building this tech ecosystem from the side of developing the talent needed for the workforce to fill those gaps that we see. And if you look at this little picture to the right, we see that this work pays, like we see it pay off. And that's the favorite part of my job, hands down. Like we see people who literally are changing, like this is life-changing opportunity for them. These are chances that they're now able to take advantage of that they weren't able to before if they had to explore it through other pathways. The image that you see is of myself with a couple of launch coders at the 2019 Women in Data Science Conference hosted at WashU. That conference was literally co-organized by one of our former data science Coder Girl graduates and a former mentor of that data science track, right? We see a graduate come to this like program, gain data science skills through our program, and go on to be a leader within the St. Louis data science ecosystem. And we see the company side of it too, right? A mentor involved in teaching her, giving back to the community in that way and pulling her into the space. And so let's like sit with that, right? We have a system, we have strategies that we can take to address the gender gap that we see in AI. It allows us to like sit and think about what could exist, like reimagine possibility, reimagine what's possible. And I'm gonna like pause for 2 seconds because I mean that. Like, I seriously want you to take a second to consider and imagine what's possible. What's possible within the workforce, what that means for what's possible in the products we produce, and what that means for what's possible in the future, right? For me, as I think about the St. Louis region and I think about the future of what's possible, I think about an upcoming nonprofit called Dimensions here, led by an amazing founder named Julian Keaton, in which he's harnessing the power of AI within multiple fields of this, within multiple areas of the St. Louis region, right? So he's been able to work with a couple of local area colleges, and use the tool as a and he's been able to use Dimensions as a tool to introduce students and come into the St. Louis region as ways to like explore the St. Louis region, right? Think about what it can mean for those students to see St. Louis through the eyes of the community members and had an impact that could have on people graduating these colleges and institutions, on people staying after graduating from these institutions, right? Think about what it means for users of Dimensions to be able to take this tool, to use AI and VR to imagine the growth that they want to see happen in their communities through AI, through the power of AI, through the work that it takes, through all of us taking the steps and the actions needed to reimagine what's possible, to take the steps and the actions needed to close the gaps that we see existing within the workforce. We have the ability to write a different future than the path that we're set on. And I really hope that you continue to reimagine with us. I hope you were able to take away something that felt like a concrete action that you could take within your sphere of influence to be a part of making and building a better tech ecosystem, a better AI ecosystem, so that we can move towards an inclusive future. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jessi. That was a great session. Thank you so much for sharing about your experience with LaunchCode and giving us a glimpse into, what is the real here in the computer field, the tech field, and its impact on, increasing the potential that could be there and increasing the diversity and the gender equity within it. A few questions that have come up. First of all, you talked about some of those degree requirements, that some of these data scientist levels are, PhDs. Well, here's an evening program. Have you guys had to navigate any sort of barriers there in the aspect of like women and others coming out of your training and being able to show that they are, they have the talent, they have the skill. There may not be a a 4-year college degree or a doctorate degree. How do you guys navigate through that?
From two sides, right? So I enjoy being able to sit on the team that does the work with our students through our classes. We build up the skills with an amazing group of mentors who are working in the industry, right? They know what skills are needed. They're teaching these skills that they have to use in their day-to-day workplace to the students who take part in our programs. And so, like, we know they're getting the skills that are most current with what's happening in the workforce. But it's twofold, right? So there's my team, but then we also have an amazing company team who spends their time working with employers, pounding the pavement to make it make sense for employers, to make it make business sense, to show them we have the talent that you need. We have people who have the skills that you're looking for. You just have to be willing to give up this credential. That doesn't necessarily mean somebody's ready on day one, right? Because when we talk about a PhD requirement, when we talk about 7 and 8 years, think about how fast the tech world changes.
Yeah.
You're going to have to train that PhD candidate anyway when they arrive on first day because something's likely changed within the way you're doing things at your company than what they learned within their program. And so, like, it's just really a quicker way to access a talent pool.
Very cool. So what have you heard from companies that have broaden their minds to be, you know, okay, there isn't a 4, 7, a 12, or whatever degree. And we have these amazing LaunchCode candidates coming in. What have you heard from them as far as the response and like, you know, are we loving these candidates coming in? Are they really ready to hit the ground running? Love to hear some of the good stuff.
Yeah, they are. And that's what I love about my job. I wish, so clearly I don't have YouTube up, but if you go to our YouTube, you can see videos where you can get the exact words from company partners, right? But time and time again, we hear companies say, um, one, our candidates come with very different life experiences, right? So the fact that maybe you're not right out of a 4-year degree program, but the experience that you gained, let's say the medical billing and coding specialist, the knowledge that they can bring to a company like Centene because of the way that they've worked within the healthcare system, stacked on top of the new technical skills that they have, can bring a different perspective to the team that they're on. And it can like lead to literally like what I mentioned, it leads to different insights being brought to the table, which leads to better and more innovative and products that can reach more people. And it's really exciting. And there's like a local startup we work with, since this is Prepare AI and we're talking about AI.
Yeah.
Um, if you think about Balto software and the way that they're harnessing AI and machine learning within the things that they do, they're a very like close company partner of ours who've hired multiple of our graduates. And like Mark of Balto is actually one of the people in that YouTube video I refer to. And he talks about how the launch coders have made an impact within Balto there. And so it's really exciting to see.
That's very cool. So you talked a lot about, you know, the barriers that can exist for women entering this computer field, education being one of them. Are there any other barriers for those that want to diversify their workforce, that want to, you know, make sure that their teams have all these great inputs and all these different perspectives? Are there any other barriers that they should be aware of and try to, you know, even these things out?
Yeah. So for me, one thing that comes to mind is when we talk about like that multifaceted approach,
Mhm.
um, sometimes people have the wrong idea of like how to reach diversity and like build diverse teams. Um, Having the numbers show up can mean nothing when women still leave the tech workforce 2 times the rate of men, right? And so there has to be some also effort happening internally within companies so that you make sure you're building inclusive team cultures that make diverse talent want to stay. That's what's going to also pull in even more diverse talent. You have organizations like LaunchCode, Empower, CyberUp, who's doing the work of training people on the end to get them to you. But if you want to keep people there, you got to do the work after people get started. You got to do the work about the team and the way the organization operates.
That's a great point. Great point. So you talked about all the different jobs that are, um, you know, open in these development positions and whatnot, and about the number of women and the other number of minorities that might fill those positions, and about how few degrees are happening. So does that mean there's just a bunch of these positions sitting open, or are other people filling in other ways? Like, how is this workforce coming together?
To me, I mean, just based off of numbers,
Mhm.
yes, right? We have to assume that these are positions that can't be filled, because if you are only willing to consider one hiring pathway, there literally just aren't enough people who have those like credentials that you expect to fill those pathways. And so like, yeah, like, and we hear employers say all the time, generically about like like the talent doesn't exist here. It's part of the story of how LaunchCode got founded, right? Our co-founder Jim McKelvey, who wanted to start Square here in
Yeah.
the St. Louis region because he's from the St. Louis area, but he had to pick up and relocate that business to the West Coast because of the lack of tech talent within St. Louis. That's what made him start LaunchCode. He said, okay, well, if it's not here, we can build it, because clearly the only ways that exist is not enough. Like, it really takes all these different parts of the ecosystem to get there, to get to where we want to be.
Great. It's great. So you ended with this sort of thought about looking to the future. if we were to ask you what you would like to see in the future, what would be that, 5-10 years down the road, magical pixie dust, what would you love to see in this field?
For me, oh, that is a hard question. And that is one of the reasons that whenever I talk to anyone about these things, I really like to end it on a note of sitting with reimagining what's possible.
Mm,
Is because that is the hardest part, I
yeah.
think. Like when we talk about reimagining what's possible, as we work to build inclusive like societies, inclusive environments, inclusive like products, um, we're talking about this and we're trying to move in that way, and it's about reimagining because it's something we've never seen before.
Yeah.
So you're not working from a mental model that like this works. And so I think for me, something that I would like love to see happen, if it's not evident through like my path to this and through my work with the Coder Girl program, is I'd love to see gender parity within the tech ecosystem. And I want to see that happen in an equitable way. Because again, like I mentioned before, like it only strengthens our economies, it only strengthens our companies. We see dividends on returns when like that exists. And so that's where I would love to see us go.
Well, I think that's a great place to end today. Thank you so much for being part of this. We hope that you have a lovely night. I think you said you're going to be teaching some classes maybe tonight. So let's get a few more
Coder Girl night.
field, a few more. Everybody's into this field, all right? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And for those watching, if you can go ahead and rate this session, we'd appreciate it. And stay tuned. We have in the next 30 minutes, our next session starts up. Thanks so much.